Welcome to the GPS to Your Business Success podcast. This week's topic, let me see if you can guess. All right. For those of you who are as old as me, that's Eric Burdon and the Animals, 1960s rock group. I didn't see them live. There's no truth to that. But that song, We Gotta Get Out of This Place, you might find yourself humming along with that if you come across it on the radio or on podcast or on anything on iTunes. If you live in California, Michigan, New Jersey, Illinois, New York, and our home state of Massachusetts here. But the reason you're feeling that way is because the state income taxes keep going up. They're very significant. And if you want to move somewhere else, the most important advice I can give you is it's a lot more than 6 months in a day living there. It's one of those things that is on top of mind for many people right now, but you need to do it right. So we're going to talk about that, let you know what the landscape looks like, and what you need to do to make your move and have it stick and survive any kind of an audit. I'm your host, Nick Papakyrikos. I'm a CPA, business advisor, and wealth manager with Papakyrikos CPAs, an 8-person firm based here in Boston, Massachusetts. And for more than 37 years, we've been helping businesses, individuals, and families reach their full financial potential all across America. And while we work with a wide range of clients, we have a particular concentration in auto repair and body shops, real estate businesses and investors, consultants, and high net worth or soon-to-be high net worth people. We talk about topics you want to know about. We explain them in easy to understand and interesting ways. We help you move closer to reaching your business and financial goals, one step and one episode at a time. We have our usual important disclaimer that the information provided in this podcast has been gathered from sources that we deem to be reliable and represent our general opinion regarding the topics discussed. Before taking any action on the information provided in this podcast, you should speak with us directly about how this information applies to your specific circumstances and both the pros and cons, if any, of any actions you might take. And before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors, Steer CRM. The Steer CRM platform helps auto repair shops acquire new customers and drives existing customers back to the shop for regular maintenance and service. We'd like to thank Auto Shop Answers. Auto Shop Answers is an industry-leading automotive repair shop training program taught by industry veteran Todd Hayes, Chief Operating Officer of Adams Automotive in Houston. It focuses on helping all repair shop owners understand the concept behind the $1 million per month shop known as Adams Automotive in Houston. The course is conducted monthly in Houston with limited seating. If you'd like to learn how to make your shop as profitable as can be, this is a class you don't want to miss. Registration is now open for upcoming classes, which are September 28th and 29th, October 18th and 21st, and November 15th and to the 18th. You can find out about the courses and the program at autoshopanswers.com. Again, that's autoshopanswers.com. And Papakyrikos CPAs, your partners in success. We provide proactive advice for our clients, advice you can understand and want to follow. We offer a fixed fee billing programs. We are the GPS to your business success. So back to Eric Burdon and the Animals. We got to get out of this place. Many states are looking to increase taxes, increase revenues. In fact, U-Haul and United Van Lines publish studies every year on the states that have the most number of people leaving and the states into which they're moving. If you're more of a tax foundation kind of a person, they also publish those types of statistics, including the dollar amount of revenue tax-wise it has left those states. And what you will find is the usual suspects, top states that lost residents: California, Michigan, New Jersey, Illinois, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New York. In Massachusetts, we recently passed what we refer to as a millionaire's surtax, taking the flat tax rate that had been around forever at 5%, changing the Constitution to allow more than one tax rate. And the initial step is to say if your income is $1 million or more, there's an extra 4%, bringing your tax rate to 9% on the income above that. Add that to a 37% federal tax rate, and now you're talking about losing 46% of your income before we start talking about Social Security, Medicare, property taxes, vehicle excise taxes, sales taxes, all the other things that states are in the business of charging. New Jersey and New York and California, you could be at 10, 12, 13% very easily. Point is, when you feel like you're going to be giving back 50% of every dollar you're earning, you can feel a bit like a punching bag. And it would be only normal for you to say, do I really want to continue to live in this state, or is there greener pastures somewhere else? Well, there are greener pastures. There are states that have no state income tax. The most well-known ones are Texas, Florida, Tennessee. New Hampshire has a version of no income taxes. There's a few other states out there. The point is there are places where there's no state income tax, and those offer the opportunity for you to significantly lower your income tax liability. But the number one statement that I hear from people, both asking me this question the first time or just in general, is goes something like this. Well, I know I've just got to be in the new state for 6 months and a day, change my driver's license, and I should be okay. And I can only say to that one big resounding no. It's a lot more complicated than that. And let me give you a couple of pieces of ground rules here to maybe make this point to you. Number one, the states that I just mentioned, for example, at high state tax rates, have high state tax rates because they have an awful lot of government spending programs. Good or bad, everybody has their own opinion on them, but they cost money. Well, these states and their voters who have elected the politicians who have enacted these programs are going to look for ways to increase the revenue they collect to be able to pay for those programs. That means that they are going to actively attack people who claim to change their residency, make them prove it, as a means of increasing and not losing revenue to those states. You need to understand how state auditors and states in general think of a change of residency. They think of it in very basic terms. They think of, Mr. Smith, if you have stopped being a New York resident and you're now a Florida resident, well, when did the moving van back up to your house in New York State, pack up your goods, and move you down to your new residency state, which you claim to be Florida? Did you sell your home in New York? When did you buy the home in Florida? Is there a moving invoice? And very often, the initial correspondence that somebody will receive from a state revenue office in relation to a proposed change of residency exam will ask for those things. They'll ask for the settlement sheet for the sale of your home, or the last lease, or the exiting lease, if they want to refer to it in some states. When you left that state, the new lease or the purchase settlement sheet for the new home, the moving invoice, things of that nature. If you can show those things, sometimes the audit ends right there, because those are very strong pebbles on the side of the scale saying you really did change your residency. What this tells us is a change of residency really needs to be more of something that matches a change in lifestyle. And when I say a change in lifestyle, think of these events. You've retired, so you've left your company as an employee, or you've sold your company that you ran for many years in your state, and you've decided to retire to a warmer climate, Florida, Texas, maybe your children live in those areas, whatever the reasons may be. There's a noticeable change in your life that indicates an intent to move. Remember, the burden of proof is on you, the taxpayer, to prove to these states that you are no longer a resident of those states and when that change happened. There could be reasons related to health. Perhaps you come down with some illness where your doctor says that you need to be in a warmer climate. Maybe that's Arizona, maybe it's Florida, wherever it might be. Could be that your children have all graduated college, school, have moved out of the house, they're off the payroll, as we say, and now you don't need this very large home. You and your spouse decide that, you know what, I don't want to have this big home. I want to be in a smaller place, and I really don't like being in the Northeast with the winters. I want to be in a warmer climate, whatever your reasons might be. If you're an empty nester, a recent empty nester, that's a lifestyle change that may very well indicate a change in residency. You also have to be consistent. We all know that for many people, you may decide that you want to move someday to Florida, but while you're still a resident of Massachusetts or New York or wherever, you buy a place in Florida and you go down there for a few weeks in the wintertime when it's cold. And then maybe as you get on in years, you go down a little more often, and maybe you find yourself spending 3 or 4 months in the Florida property, but you still have your home up north. All of a sudden, you decide on January 1st, 2024, that I'm no longer a Massachusetts or New York resident, that I'm going to be a Florida resident as of January 1st, 2024. Well, what a state residency auditor will ask you is, well, what happened on January 1st? You owned the property in Florida on December 31st. You owned the property in Massachusetts or New York on December 31st. You still own them on January 1st, 2024. What changed? Why were you a resident of Massachusetts or New York on December 31st? What magically happened to make you a resident of the new state on January 1st? That's a tough question to answer. Think of it this way. Nobody moves on New Year's Day, okay? At least not normally. Yeah, you're sleeping in, you have a big New Year's Eve party, or whatever it might be. That's the way auditors think. So there needs to be data and situations that make that make sense. Now, maybe you moved out of your home on December 31st, and maybe you didn't sell your home, but maybe somebody else is going to be living there. Maybe you're going to rent it from that point forward. Maybe one of your adult children is going to move into the area and occupy it there. The point is, you will have moved out. You will no longer have that domicile. So there has to be some activity that we can hang our hat on to say that this is why my residency changed. So having said that, the reality is that for most people, a change of residency is going to happen during the year sometime. Maybe you sold your house on October 1st, drove down to Florida, and now that's the event that we can hang our hat on and say, that's when we moved. But oftentimes, you'll find that you still have properties in both locations. That doesn't by itself prevent you from proving a change of domicile, but it does present some interesting little tax traps that you want to be aware of. The more common ones are somebody who wants to claim that they're changing their domicile from Massachusetts to Florida, still tells the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or the city or town that their Massachusetts property is, that this is my primary residence, and if that town or city has a reduced property tax rate for a primary residence, they say, well, gee, Massachusetts, this is my primary residence, charge me the lower tax. They say the same thing in Florida. Well, you can't have two primary residences. So you need to think about those situations because they all have to indicate a change of residence. Some of the sillier ones, though, that have caught people up in the past are, let's say you're a hunter or a fisherman, a fisherwoman, fisher person, whatever the word is these days, and you go to the local town hall and you get your fishing license, and the clerk says, is it a resident license for $10 or is it a non-resident license for $50? You might be inclined to say, well, I'd rather pay $10 than $50, and I've been a resident all my life. I'm going to tell the clerk that I want the resident license. You get the resident license, and later on, a few years down the road, when you're trying to prove that you're no longer a resident of that state, the auditor will find that form, and they will check that, and they'll see, well, gee, you claim to be a resident of this state back then. We think you're still a resident of that state. So you need to be consistent, and you need to make sure that this looks like a move, because it really has to be a move. Don't also forget that you have the ability to save up to $500,000 of the gain on the sale of your primary residence. Now, you have to have lived in that house for 2 of the last 5 years, so you can still move somewhere else, sell your home a couple of years later, and get that gain on the sale. But let's say you've exceeded those 3 years of time, you might lose the $500,000 tax-free gain on the sale of your home in your former state. So you need to think through the entire picture. Think of it this way as well. What an auditor is looking for that indicates a move are what sometimes is referred to as the teddy bear test or the near and dear test. In other words, the presumption is that people will keep the things that are near and dear to them as close to them as they can. So if you have a safe deposit box with, your grandmother's china or, jewels from 3 generations before, and that safe deposit box is in Massachusetts where you still have a house, but you choose to live, you say you're living in Florida, the argument will be, well, then why wouldn't you put these valuable items in Florida? Now, it doesn't mean that you have to. I can think of an example. Let's say you have some expensive furs, and your home in Florida is a townhouse that doesn't have a doorman, but your home in Massachusetts has a doorman, has more security. There might be a reason to have those things in Massachusetts. What about your children? My wife and I recently downsized from our family home, and as we did so, many of our grown children's items found their way into the basement of our new home to the extent we had room for it, and then the rest went into storage. Well, if you're paying for your children's storage in your old state of residence, it's certainly possible an auditor will say, well, gee, why are you paying for these things? And if your home is Florida, why aren't you paying for them for the storage down there? Now, you can argue this point many ways, but the reality is if the burden of proof is on you, you have to make a clear and convincing argument that this is that you are a resident of the new state. You'll do the typical things. For example, you'll want to change doctors, change where your house of worship, if you have a church or a temple or whatever it might be, social clubs, country clubs, for example. If your children are school age, your children probably need to go to school in the new state you're at, or at the very least, if they're in college, they need to be coming back and listing the new places, the new state as their residence. You want to change all addresses on statements, financial accounts. You'll want to change the addresses on estate planning documents. You want them to all list that you are now a resident of the new state. Things like voter registration, vehicle registrations, telephone service, those are all, easy ones to change. But the point is they have to be changed. Now, how are states finding these people, taxpayers who are claiming a change of residency, to then, request that they prove it? Well, the world is constantly changing, and I will tell you that one of the new changes, artificial intelligence, is actively being used by some states. In fact, New York State, if you look at the data for the last 4 or 5 years, has fewer auditors for this issue, but they're doing more audits. And part of the reason I've been told is because they use artificial intelligence to scan the data on the tax returns. Now, states have access to the federal tax returns. So presumably what they're doing is they're going through the data on the federal returns. They're going through the data on a part year state return. So let's say you changed residency from New York State on October 1st and became a Florida resident. The year you move, you're going to file a part year resident return from January 1st through September 30th, let's say, as a New York resident. And then you'll file a resident return in the state that you moved to from October 1st to December 31st, assuming they have a state income tax. Florida, in this case, does not. Well, they're going to look at that. They're also going to look at that state tax return, which always asks for the amount of income on your federal tax return. And one of the reasons they ask for that is that they see you have $1 million of income on your federal tax return, but your New York part year resident only shows $75,000 of income. They're going to possibly identify that return as a return that, if we can show they really didn't meet the residency change requirements, the rest of that money can be taxed to New York State. So it's easy to find you, and they will look for you. Now, how else can this come up? Well, let's say you have an unhappy ex-spouse who decides that he or she wants to inform the Department of Revenue in your former state that maybe you don't quite meet the rules. States also use cell phone data. A few years ago, you would see these large box-like trucks parked on the borders of the states that border with New York State, And what they would be doing is tracking cell phone signals. And they would track the cell phone signals to the address of record. They would match up vehicles that came in and out of the state during the week. So let's say you live in Massachusetts, you're driving down to New York 5 days a week for an assignment. They're going to look and see, gee, well, this particular cell phone number was in New York 5 days a week for the last 6 months. Did they file a New York return? They're going to look and see, is there any connection to New York? Same works in reverse. When you try to say that you are a resident of another state, your cell phone signal is constantly pinging towers near where you are. They will ask for cell phone data, and they will be able to get it because deep in the bowels of the licensing and documents you agreed to when you signed your last cell phone contract, there is going to be language that allows the cell phone company to disclose these records to government agencies. So your cell phone records are going to show where you are. Using that data alone, if they see you in your former state for an unreasonably high amount of time, they're going to try to argue that you are really a resident of the old state. They will also look at things like ATM cards, debit cards, easy passes. We went through a recent residency audit, which we were successful on, but the information that was requested is very revealing. This particular taxpayer had sold their house and immediately drove down to Florida where their new home was. It wasn't a new home. They'd had that home before, but they were now making it their primary residence, and they'd sold their old home. They were looking to see, did they drive down to Florida? Did they stop and stay at hotels along the way, get gas along the way, meals? And as long as those credit card and checking account statements show a trip down to Florida and don't show them coming back except on rare occasions, that's proof that they spent their time in Florida. People try to get creative. Sometimes people think they're, as we say, too cute by a half. And let me tell you some of the things that we've read about that people have tried to do to maybe prove that they're no longer residents of their old states. Some people will purchase what they refer to as burner phones, a phone that doesn't have an ID. And when they go to their old state, they take this burner phone and they use it. Well, that means that the phone, your regular phone, is basically dormant during these periods of time. Well, what do you think a revenue agent from your old state is going to think when your phone records show normal activity for most of the year, but for a few weeks a year or a few months a year, it's basically dark. There's no activity. They're going to assume that when it's dark, you're in your old state and you're trying to deceive them and say that you were not in that state. Again, the burden of proof is on you. We came across a story recently where somebody tried to take their regular phone. They literally strapped it to the collar of their dog, which was at home. Presumably they had a dog sitter there. But when the auditors checked the cell phone signals and the moving of the phone, they would see basically that it stayed at the home for most of the day. 2 or 3 times a day would go out into the backyard and it'd go back in. You don't need to be a genius to figure out this is the dog going outside, taking care of its business and not. In other words, we leave such extremely plentiful digital footprints in our lives every day. You are going to be very hard-pressed to prove anything other than what's real. So what you have to remember is this. When you move, when you change residency, you have to do 2 things. You have to leave your old state, and as somebody I listened to recently put well, you need to stick the landing. And then we sit here today, happens to be the last day of the Summer Olympics. The gymnasts have all finished. It's a relevant example. Not only do you leave Massachusetts or New York, but you have to land, in this case, in Florida. And what would prevent you from landing in Florida? Well, let's say you did sell your business and you decided to do that lifetime cruise. So you sell your home on April 1st. You immediately get on a plane or a cruise ship and you spend the next 3 months traveling across Europe, Asia, or wherever you happen to want to go. When you finish, you go back to Florida and you start living there. Well, the time that you spent after you left Massachusetts and traveling all over Europe is considered to be not in Florida. You're still a Mass resident. You haven't landed in Florida. So there's a whole host of things you need to be aware of to make sure that not only do you leave your old state, but you stick the landing and prove that you are a resident of the new state. Now, how do you do that? Well, You can do it with a lot of anecdotal evidence. Let's say there are photos of grandma's china taken many years ago at a holiday at your old home. And then there's a picture of a holiday at your new home, and you see that same grandma's china that comes out only for the holidays is on the table at that event. We leave photographs all over the place on social media these days. So there are ways you can prove it. My point here is simply that don't assume that being out 6 months in a day is going to work it. These states are very motivated to save their revenue, and they look at it as their revenue because if you're a resident of that state, then you owe them the taxes. So keep in mind, trying to change your residency is a process you need to plan for. You should talk with your tax advisors, us, or whoever it might be, to make sure you understand the pros and cons and set it up correctly. Well, that's it for this week's topic. Check out our podcast page, as usual, for useful links and tools related to today's podcast. If you have a topic you'd like to hear about, please email us at podcast@papakyrikoscpa.com. That's podcast@papakyrikoscpa.com, just like it sounds. From time to time, we will draw one lucky winner from all the emails received since the last drawing to win a $25 gift card. So if your financial car is already moving steadily down the road to success, I hope we've helped you move a little further today with this podcast. If, however, you feel like the engine is hesitating a bit, maybe you hit a pothole in the road, or maybe you took a detour someplace and you're not sure that the road you're on right now is going to take you to a place you want to be, you're in the right place today. We are the GPS to your business success, and we'd love to help you get back on track, to move you towards your business and financial goals, whatever they may be. So as you go about your affairs this week, remember, a journey of even 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next week.